Okay, so the next lesson is about spiritual formation and mental health. So now, I put recent research again because there's a lot of reading around it, and I don't want to give you reams and reams of, the PowerPoints and you have all the articles on and stuff. You can go and do it yourself. So, and there's been research about the misconceptions about mental health that can be found in churches. So this is important, right? Because we're in church and we might have some of these misconceptions ourselves, or have these latent thoughts that I'm now going to bring to enlightenment. Okay, so the first one is mental illness does not exist as it has an atheistical beginning. So basically, the father of psychology is Freud, and Freud was anti-religion because he believed that those who believe in religion have not fully found sufficiency within themselves, and so they need to believe in a higher power outside of themselves to save them. And so because of that, he did contribute greatly, because let's think about it. He came into society and said, you can cure your hysteria, they called it anxiety hysteria back then, or madness, with just talking. No intervention, no physical intervention, no medication, none of that, talking. So obviously people laughed him off and thought, okay, that's why it's called the talking cure. And it's amazing how then actually people started to take note and thought, oh wait, actually when people are able to talk through their difficulties, someone who was previously paralyzed is now able to speak. Or someone who kept on fainting is now able to function in life, and so expanded the field of psychology. And so then that's why there's always been psychology and religion, and they're not friends. And it's understandable in so many ways, because even when I'm in the field, I need to remember that I am not God. And so when people come to me for help, it is not because of me and my intellect or my wisdom or all my theory or all my training over the years that they are now healed, because it can be quite a power trip for someone. If they see someone who is absolutely fragmented and in psychosis, and then with the interventions you use to become in their right mind and functioning and contributing in society, how can you not think that you are God? And so I totally understand the aversion towards psychology with that perspective. So then the second one is mental illness is an excuse for laziness and a lack of faith. So, and I've even had different people at church ask me, so how do I know the person just lacks faith and they just need to get over their anxiety? And because, God at the end of the day says, cast your anxiety upon him, and he will keep you in perfect peace. And so that means if you aren't able to do that, the correlation is, well, you're not faithful enough. So that's why that can be the misconception. And then churches generally have a Fixit and be doers mentality as a sign of spirituality. That if you're someone who can tend to fix things, or you're busy doing the work of God, you're the spiritual one. But if you're the pew warmer, even that term pew warmer is derogatory, then what space do you have here? You're just wasting oxygen, and can you please allow the rest of us to use it? Okay, so that's where, you might not say it verbally, or you may even think it sometimes. You think, surely this person's just being lazy. Come on, man. I mean, we can't be so incapacitated that you can't do this simple task. And it can be so confusing, because you look at yourself and you think, but if I'm able, surely you are. And that's usually the base, right? If I can do it, you can do it. And that's sometimes how we encourage people. Look at me do it. And, and then the other person's looking at you like, no, I don't care if you can do it, I'm not doing it. And then you think, it's so easy. And we forget that we all have our measure of faith. Some greater, some lesser. Even the parable of the talents, 5, 3, 1. God apportions it differently. I heard that Anne-Marie spoke about, the body and how, there's those that are seemingly, what's that passage again? Unpresentable, we treat with special modesty. And I do feel that mental illness can fall under that. Because we can feel like, oh, we can't present this part of it. And we ourselves might even want to hide that part of ourselves. And, we treat with special modesty and care. That we're not pushing that person out to be, because if you're anxious and for example, if you have social anxiety and you point it out to a person that, hey, this person has social anxiety, they're not going to come to church next week. Okay, you've just really made them run for the hills, for example. So, okay, and then the final thing is, it's true, the rest all stems from the accountability culture and the ongoing disagreements regarding the extent that someone can control their own mind and behavior. So basically, there's a belief that we are in full control of our minds, therefore we have full responsibility for our behavior. And there's so much research that, yes, that is indeed true, but then it can also be untrue. So that's why in forensic psychology, for example, you have to look for malignancy, you got to look for malingering, and you got to look for something else, I forget. But basically, malignancy is, are they on the psychopathic scale of the personality disorders? And malingering as in, are they trying to fudge results so that they don't appear so, and then they are actually mad, so they don't have to be accountable for the murder they just committed. So, because, sometimes someone pleads insanity, and then so the role of the forensic psychologist has to be, well, were you indeed insane in the moment, or were you in your right mind? And so that means there is an assumption that we can be not in our right mind. And there's been so many scriptures in the Bible that talks about people who are not in their right mind. And then they came to their right mind again. So you see it in the scriptures. As we start thinking about it, we can't dispel the fact that mental illness was present even in the scriptures. And so let's think about it. Because God can heal with just his word, and he can destroy with just his word, right? Then there are instances that Jesus himself did not use his word. He used, for example, when he healed the blind man, what did he do? Saliva and mud, right? And then he didn't even heal immediately, right? He could have done that in an instant. It's a twofold process. I see trees, and then to be able to see with clarity. And it's interesting because sometimes when you're between psychosis and reality, what I find that individuals like this, there are moments where they have clear mind and then they slip back into their psychotic state. And that transition helps me to see, okay, there's a chance they can connect in with reality again. So, I drew this really childlike drawing on the left again. I'm a child therapist at heart. Okay, so our brains, you can't, we all know now that our cognition and our feelings and our behavior, they're all interconnected. I don't know if Raj talked about Lev yet, but that terminology really captures psychological health. It's where when your inner being and outer being are both healthy, everything connects in with one another. And that's why that image. But it has nothing to do with the side notes. I see adding to our understanding. Okay, so mental illness is, that's why I added it, likened to disability. Because there could be a fracturing and a split, and sometimes you know it yourself. You know what you do, but you can't do it. you feel very different to what you know you should do. And that's the disconnect. And imagine this being in a disordered state. So, for something to be classified as a mental illness, where one's mood or affect debilitates an individual, it results in global impairment in functioning. So basically, we all can be anxious. We can all know how it feels like. However, when it becomes debilitating to the point you cannot interact with the other, and you start, eliciting behaviors that help you to manage your anxiety to an extreme point, that is when you can see that it is clearly a mental disturbance. It's a real illness. And so I know that some people want to move away from mental illness and rather look at it as mental health. But I see sick people. Working as a clinical psychologist, I see sick people. And that's why I say, well, you are sick. And it brings relief to people when I say, but you are sick. And why do you expect yourself to function without being, seeking healing or improvement in your well-being? And that brings such relief. Because a lot of people tell them it's all in their mind. They themselves say to themselves, it's all in your mind, so why can't you get over it? Stop it now. And it's amazing to see just that acknowledgement that it is an illness can help someone able to accept what they have and then, seek the treatment that's required. So mental illness can be episodic, invisible, and situation specific. And so episodic meaning that you could have several episodes. So those, for example, with bipolar mood disorder, they have different episodes, whether the mania or the depression or in right mind. And they go through these waves, depending type 1, type 2, the waves are really huge or a little bit smaller. So, and so sometimes you're not going to have the consistency that you require from the person. Obviously, when you start thinking about that in church, and someone, for example, who struggles with bipolar disorder and you expect consistency, you're setting that person up for failure. And it can be very isolating then for that person. And it's devastating because they already have self-judgment, and so to expect them to do what it is not possible for them to do, it's completely debilitates the person and makes the person feel like, what, I can't do this disciple thing. Clearly God has not made me for it, and let me step out. That's a tragedy. And so once you have an awareness of someone's illness, then you know how you should then be able to treat this person. So for example, in the mania side, when the person's a little bit more hyper-religious, for example, I'm just using bipolar as an example right now, they are more engaged, reading their Bible, preparing sermons or really out there, and you're so excited. Use that time. And when they go through the depressive episode, when they want nothing to do with you, suddenly disappear for days and weeks on end, and be present during that time. Don't have that same expectation. And when they are a little bit more stable, neither manic or depressed, and they feel like they can healthily engage with others, celebrate that time. So hopefully that helps you. So now, I wanted to give you an example of how mental illness can debilitate. I'm using anxiety. I think because since the pandemic, I've had more cases of anxiety than I've had, since 2011. Okay, so the last 3 years, it's been, it's another type of pandemic. So that's why I'm using anxiety as an example, because you most likely will find it in your ministries. Those people who are struggling to come out to Bible talks or church may have developed a debilitating social anxiety during the pandemic, because the isolation and then the fear of the virus and contraction and all of that, and then all this different type of news, it can make the world feel threatening. And those who have a genetic predisposition, it will only amplify that. So that's why I'm starting with anxiety. Okay, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. So basically, you're anxious about everything. Every moment, every interaction, every social situation, whether it be one-on-one or in a social context, or, the world is very threatening. So that's a simplified version of JD. So then, imagine this description of this person. I say patient X, but maybe it should be this disciple, okay? As a result, is unable to leave their home due to fear of judgment, thus misses a lot of services, is invited to a party, but most likely will cancel last minute, and it's a perpetual pattern. Does not believe anyone likes them and is inherently unlikable, therefore withdraws from conversation and is therefore perceived as antisocial. Discipling times are often about corrective behavior, and scriptures used to call them to repentance. Could this sound familiar? Or you may even have some people that come to mind when you suddenly look at this. And what you may not realize, or the person, is that they might have a generalized anxiety disorder. Because what we tend to think of is, why are you missing so many services? And you're being antisocial because, we're trying to encourage one another and, have fun together, and you're being a party pooper in a sense. Because, the feeling around it, that you're just being difficult now. Why are you being so difficult? We may have those experiences of others where you start feeling irritable and frustrated with the person. That for you should be your indication of, I'm not quick to listen. Because if you're quick to listen, you wouldn't be quick to anger. That frustration and irritation is a sign of anger. And so that's when you know, okay, maybe I should be looking further into this. Because that would be your reaction. Why? Because, interestingly enough, the person expects you to have that reaction, and then guess what? You confirm their reaction. And that's why when you're aware of your own bodily reactions, that is very helpful. Because the next thing you say, you should rather what? If you're feeling frustrated and irritable with the person. Sometimes we might feel like, are we being duped? And are we just giving someone a pass, an excuse for that kind of behavior? I think that's usually what we tend to now wrestle with. Am I just being too accommodating now, and I'm not drawing the line where I should be? Ever have those thoughts? Usually what I find that when we err on the side of grace, a lot more is revealed. And it's not for us to determine someone's, response to God. At the end of the day, God is the revealer of hearts. And sometimes we want to be God, and we want that result now. That's why Paul speaks about wait on the Lord, and he will reveal in his own time. That lesson can be for you in terms of, what, I need to work on something myself. Me trying to change this person and their behavior is not your responsibility. So hopefully that will relieve you of that. And God's wisdom is always proved true. If the person was indeed making excuses, it will be revealed. It will become very obvious, and you just need to wait patiently for it to form and expose itself. If it need be, or the other way around, where you're then relieved when the person comes back and says, I finally decided to seek therapy, and I didn't realize I have a generalized anxiety disorder and I'm on medication. Won't you be relieved that you paused the button? Yeah. And you were a person that felt like they could come back to, and they can say, thank you for being patient with me, because I couldn't even understand myself. And we want to be that kind of community for one another. So, okay. So what else can we do to assist? I wanted to get some of your thoughts. I appreciate that. What you feel is valid, what you're experiencing is valid, and I will be with you through it. And what you were mentioning about addressing the root cause and not the behavior. Because we might see a tantrum in a child, right? What would your immediate assumptions be? Undisciplined. Yeah, what else?
Enabling parents.
Excuse me, what about parents?
They're enabling
Enabling parents. Oh yeah, that's a lovely one. Yes. Looking for attention. Mm-hmm.
It's like they're not getting their way.
Not
The
getting.
child is getting their way.
Yes, the child's not getting their way. So, I mean, that could all, and it's all generally negative perspective, right, about the child. What if I had to, once you find out, you know that the child has sensory processing difficulties and is on the autistic spectrum, on the lower cognitive functioning. So basically, they are nonverbal, they cannot express themselves except through behavior. And they are highly sensitive to sights and sounds. What would you say about that child having a tantrum then, once you have gathered all your information? Isn't your response so different once you gather the right information? Then we can do that for adults as well. We're just big children. That's what I often say to people. We've just learned to, pretty it up a little bit, but we're big children. And we've learned to manage our big emotions, well, mostly, without having to respond in a behavioral way. And we have words, wider vocabulary to express our difficulty, so we don't have to throw punch in the wall. If we still do that, it's okay, as long as it's maybe not the wall. Try a punching bag, or because sometimes that energy has to be expelled, and if you're not hitting a person, that's a good thing. So awesome. Any other thoughts? I love what you share. Basically, to summarize, what you're saying is know your capacity. And so, because we can't all do something. For example, is it Eden? Yes. I could never do dance therapy, for example, in the future. But if I know someone who needs to be able to release trauma through dance, I'd probably refer to her one day as an example. And like, for example, if someone is suicidal, I don't suggest you do it yourselves unless you've been trained to be able to assist the suicidal person, as an example. So know when to kick it up. That's key, because that's the best way you can assist. And finding the right person to be able to assist. Don't just share it with some other person who would be clueless, because that could be more harmful than anything else. Just because they're in leadership doesn't mean that they are skilled to do so. Okay. Sometimes when someone is suicidal, it's hard for them to see that it's actually difficult for the other person. Okay. And so you say, I feel worried, and I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed with what you have shared with me, because I'm totally not equipped. And if you do go and kill yourself, I will be devastated. And because of that, I'm going to have to let relevant others know. Even in therapy, people forget that I have an ethical obligation to disclose if there's harm to self and harm to others. And so they will disclose, I have bought a gun, and this is my suicide note, and when I leave here, I will no longer exist. I'm not going to just sit there. Immediately, I call the relevant emergency contact person, because the people always have to fill in a form beforehand, and I contact that person. That person may hate me, and they say, I'll never come back to you because I came to you with something very confidential. And that is fine, because some things take precedence over others, and their life takes precedence over what's, over anything else. And so that is the reason why you would disclose. There are some people who even come back to me a few years later and say, thank you for disclosing. And they're grateful for it. They were angry, they were furious, they thought I was a monster at the time. But then years later, they realize when their lives have changed, and they may have had a severe depression, that they didn't realize they could live life differently as a result, which is lovely. So remember that. The disclosure of the suicide is not the end point. That's the start of a journey. And so that might be helpful for you. It's not the end. It's actually a beginning for a different direction. Okay, great. But, okay, so this is my addition to it. We're going to speed through it. It's Proverbs 20, verse 5. It talks about the heart of man as deep waters, and a man of understanding draws it out. So, and then Romans 12, verse 3 to 5. So this is a lovely scripture to start with. Think of yourself first with sober judgment before you think about the other person. It's a great. And don't jump to conclusions too quickly. That whole tantrum scenario, very different once you have a lot more information around it. So gather your information, be curious, don't make assumptions. Thank you so much, everyone, and for your excitement.